Okay, so back to the second video for the double. So what we were saying just before the video ended, video one, is that really we were reflecting on this table. We'd recognise that the presentation of views 1, 2, 3 would be words or phrases from across the rest of the text now that really galvanizes, corroborates the ideas that we've had before, that accents create anxiety. So for example, we might find the words worry and fret as part of that semantic field. So far so good. Okay, now we've got this table. Now we know that this table, this way of planning and organizing ideas in a table like this would never really work within the context of the exam. It is what we call an interim measure. It's a way to plan to write outside of the exam room. Within the exam room, you would bypass this into what I'm about to show you. But this is a good way to practice. I would also say, quick disclaimer for those of you working on your coursework, if you're dealing with multiple texts for your coursework, text A, text B, this can be a positive way to organize your information, your data, if it feels a bit too much. Because really this model of analysis is transferable. So anyway, we have this table. Brilliant. Yay. What do we do with it? And that's what we're going to look at in the remainder of this lesson. Okay, so we know we're writing a response to a question 3. So here it is: analyze how language is used in text A and B to present views about accents. Now, really, the planning table so far has organized our ideas. It's kind of like thinking out loud on paper. So we've looked at text A and B. We've been tracking ideas about accents through the texts. The final column, where it was similarities or differences, enables us to hit this bullet point: examine any similarities or differences. Now, explore how effectively the text present their views is what we're going to start to look when we build our paragraphs today, or in this hour, sorry. Now, when we explore anything effectively, what we're really doing is saying, well, how well does it work? How well does text A work in presenting attitudes towards accents? How well does text B work in selling the idea of elocution lessons? Okay, and that's going to be part of that kind of 40 marks that we're looking to achieve. So we're going to just think today then about the guided writing process. And I'm going to give you some time in this lesson to start actually doing some writing. So we know it's a section B question 3. We know it's worth 40 marks. And we know we want to produce an essay at the end of this that hits as much of this criteria as possible. Okay, so a simple plan. Now, this is the simple plan that you would do if within an exam circumstance. Okay, this plan can be achieved in a couple of minutes once you've learned it off by heart. So we are analysing how language is used in text A and B to present views about accents. Okay, so about accents. I'll change the wording of that question. About accents. Sorry. There we go, as if by magic. And in your answer, we should analyse graphological features. Hello table. Now, you know in the table, we've just actually looked at the titles. Now, if we were looking at any other visuals in the two texts, there is space within an analysis of graphological features that we could look at colour choices, the way the pages have been laid out. But we always want to look at the headlines and the titles if we don't quite make it to the other areas. Now, neither of our texts do have stand first, but there is some visual elements. There is a colour scheme in text B that we could build up to considering if we had time. But we definitely want a paragraph that analyses graphological features. We want to analyse the opening sentence and section. So you can see how this plan really is the simplified version of the table we've just done. We want to analyse the presentation of views. Now, we want to cover at least 1 to 3 views from across the two texts. We definitely want to analyse the closing sentence and section. That enables us to hit marks for cohesion. Does the text end in the same way that it began? Is there a cyclical link? Is it ending in a very different way? And we can offer a summative or evaluative conclusion. Now, summative means summary. Yep, we can summarise what both texts are doing and how well they're doing it. Evaluative means we can begin to compare the texts and see which is more effective. And we can begin to say that both text A and B deal with issues towards accents, However, A is more convincing because it's a piece of journalism. It still retains a kind of like detached perspective, whereas text B is going to be biased because it's looking to sell elocution lessons. That's evaluative, where you begin to comment on which is more effective. So this is the element that we could learn. Now I'm just circling here because sometimes I try and create nice little acronyms. There is no acronym. But what we want to know is that an essay plan in exam conditions for a section B question 3 covers graphological features, opening, presentation of views, closing sentence, summative and evaluative conclusion. So that's a simple plan. Then within each of those areas, graphological, opening, presentation of views, closing sentence, summative, evaluative conclusion, what do we do? Now for this, we do have a nice little acronym. We have a single paragraph outline, a model for analysis. Now, the very first thing then is that we always want to be guiding each paragraph by thinking about this question. In this paragraph, how are we showing that we know what they are thinking or feeling about the topic? And we want to be able to identify and interpret a perspective. We want to be able to describe how the language works to present that idea using language labels. And we want to explain, evaluate the effects and representation created. We want to be able to appreciate in context, and we want to be able to link and compare. Now, the identify versus interpret. Identify is the lowest order of skills. To identify means to be able to spot, to pick out. So every time we can identify a feeling, an idea, a point of view, yes, that is a starting place, but if that's all we do, we're going to really limit our responses. Now, identify immediately becomes a higher order skill when we interpret. So this is what I see, this is what it means. So when we talk about identify and interpret, we are looking at this is what I've identified, this is what I've picked out, this is what it means. And as soon as we engage with the meaning, we begin to interpret the point of view, the feeling, the idea, the perspective, we are accessing higher grades. Now, we want to be able to describe how the language works to present that idea. And we want to be using the full range of language labels. Now, again, describing how the language works is often integrated into a paragraph. So each of these doesn't necessarily represent a separate sentence, but can be integrated and embedded. And we do know that although it doesn't have to be the longest description, so it can be a very short embedded sentence, that the language labels, as you've been taught by myself and Miss Lockett, do equate to different areas on the mark scheme. So there is a difference between the language label of an adjective versus comparative adjective, or noun, an abstract noun, interrogative versus complex. So we do know that you access higher aspects of the mark schemes based on the language labels that you are using. So whenever we describe how the language works, the challenge is always to push yourself to describe in as much detail as possible. We also recognize then that we know complex sentences, clause analysis, patterns are higher up the mark scheme. So we identify and interpret a feeling. We then pick and label and describe the language that is linked to that feeling. And then we begin to explain/evaluate. Now, the first thing about an explain is always linked to words like because, which, okay? Because we're giving a reason why. So we're giving a reason why a word like fret or worry reinforces the idea that people are anxious about something. Okay, we look to give a reason. Because fret and worry are from the same semantic field as anxious, we know the writer is creating or drawing attention to the anxiety and concern caused by accents. We've begun to explain. Now, when it says explain the representations created, we know that at a linguistic, at a language level, a writer's choice of words will create particular effects and representations. So a writer who chooses words like fret and worry is representing an attitude of concern. Okay, now the effect of that attitude means, well, what's the impact on the audience, the reader? So the effect is impact, representation is really meaning, connotations. Now, for a higher grade, evaluate means we begin to use language like effectively. To some extent, the writer successfully creates or unsuccessfully, the writer fails to sell the idea of tutor pages. The writer fails to sell the idea of elocution in a positive way. So when we evaluate, we're not just talking about what things mean, what connotations, what representations are created, and the impact of those, but beginning to evaluate how well is it working. Now, we also want to appreciate in context. Now, you can see the acronym IDEAL reminds us that we are creating an ideal model for analysis. Now, context. Now, this is key for the higher parts of the mark scheme. In other words, if you take a word like fret or worry out of the context of the whole piece, you can still tell me what it means. You can still tell me what it might make a reader think. You can still call it an adjective or an abstract noun. But if you're not putting it into the context, I have no idea what people are worried about, where that worry is coming from, and what that worry is linked to. So we have to put words always into context. Now, the context could be of the sentence, the paragraph, the whole text. And again, we've started with that table. We reminded ourselves of GASP. So one is an online article from Canada. One is a tutor pages that has an agenda to sell. Those things make a difference. And when you begin to write and analyze language, it's that appreciation of context and difference that gets you the higher marks. And then this part. Now, guys, there is a whole section of the mark scheme, 15 marks, awarded for your ability to link and compare. Okay, so to talk about the similarities and differences across the two texts. Now, the model we're going to use today is we're going to use a kind of integrated model where we're going to move across A to B, A to B, A to B quite succinctly. Okay, and we're going to just look at some shared models, shared writing, and then I'm going to ask you to complete some paragraphs of your own. Okay, now in order to do this, we are going to return to an A grade students model that we've seen before. Now, we have seen this in the last lockdown because there is only one A grade essay that has been made readily available to us through the exam board. And just as a quick disclaimer, this A grade student is not writing about accents. They are writing about another text and how it presents gender. But it does just enable us to see what an A grade student is doing. And then also for us, it gives us a model that we can follow. So in this art extract, this is the opening. This is the very first paragraph that the student has written. We can see that they've done it to a standard across the whole article and the response that gets an A. Okay, so text A uses the title to position an audience as if they have heard the issue before. So it actually begins immediately with an effect. Okay, so it's talking about the effect of the title. It's positioning the audience. So effect is always relational. Look to your audience. What's the effect on the audience? Okay, and this title in this text is positioning an audience as if they have heard the issue before. Do women really talk like 12-year-old girls? So there's their embedded evidence. Okay, the use of the adverb of degree. So immediately then we've got this D for description. They're describing the adverbs. Look at that adverb of degree. Can you see how they've layered their labeling? They haven't just said adverb of degree, which is higher order. The use of the adverb of degree really implies the publication is challenging a widely accepted viewpoint. So there we've got that they're identifying that the text is challenging a viewpoint. So this idea of identifying a feeling, an idea, an opinion. Text B uses an imperative. So now they've moved across to the second text. They've used another descriptive term. Okay, imperative, young women give up the vocal fry. This positions the author as a voice of power. So there's the representational explanation. And then we're back to text A. Text A mainly uses a question to appeal to those interested. Well, text B will grab the attention using a strong sounding instruction. Contextually, so there we can see that they're appreciating the relationship between the reader and writer, and they're linking across the text using whilst and contrastingly. And that lovely little contextually, they're appreciating the context. Contextually, text B uses an image of a female. This effectively creates a relatability between the author and intended audience. So they feel like it is someone of them rather than an outsider. So there's the explanation of effects. Now, this is the beginning of a whole A-grade essay. Now, the thing about A-grade essays under time conditions is that the examiners look to reward what is there. They don't take marks away for what is lacking, and they don't remove marks if it's inconsistent. So there are ways that when you read this, you could see potential flaws. You could be like, wow, that wording is quite repetitive. It's not very specific in places, but it's not our job to criticize this response. It's our job to see what this response is doing and then breathe and say, okay, if this person's doing it, then I can, then we can. So let's have a think about how we can begin to use this model to write our own analysis of the titles of the two texts we've looked at. Okay, so here we've got, I know it's looking a bit busy, this page, isn't it? Our table from before. So these are the notes I've made. You've got your own table that you can use. So accent shy Brits, anxious to talk posh. We've got the simple declarative. The way we speak can change our lives. I've just looked at that again and we need to audit that. Guys, I can't have you going forward with me making a mistake. Sometimes I do things quickly. That's actually, it's not a simple sentence because we've got we speak can change. So we've got two verb phrases there being used together. So it's complex declarative. So, Miss Deutsch, so do make a change for me. So we're going to use this information, both titles. Well, we're going to have to change that. One title is a simple, one's a complex declarative. Text A is third person, text B is first person, but both are introducing the topic of adapting speech. Now, this is our student, our A graded student. And what I've done here is I've started to lift words or phrases from the paragraphs of our A grade student so that we could begin to edit them to make them our own. So I'm just going to do this so we can do some shared writing. Okay, just need to get rid of that for a minute because we're going to start to change this for our own. So now, guys, when I do this, in a minute, I'm not going to press save because I just want to show you the process, but I really want you to write this paragraph on your own. Okay, so text A uses the title to position the audience as if then. Okay, so what is our audience? What is our reader not according to this headline? Okay, accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh. Now remember, guys, what country is this newspaper from? What do we have to put down under context? The GASP. This is an online article from Canada. So the text A uses the title to position an audience as if they are not British, but, okay, they've heard the issue before, but we wouldn't, so we're not British, we might not have heard the issue before, but we might be interested in the issue. So text A uses the title to position an audience as if they are not British, but interested in the issue of accents. Okay, so then we put our quote in. Okay, so then we say accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh. Okay, so I'm just following his model, but as I'm going, I'm beginning to change it to suit the text. I'm not going beyond these examples. This paragraph, this opening of this model A grade student, it's all about the titles. So the use of blank implies the writer is. So we want to think about then, now if we were really being cohesive, we have to build on this idea that we're being positioned. Okay, so text A uses the title to position an audience as if they are not British but interested in the issues of accents. So what is the word in this title that suggests that we are not British? Good. It's the fact that it uses Brits and that text A is a third person. A third person account. Okay, so we could say the use of the third person simple declarative, implies the writer is. So let's just have a little look then. The use of the adverb implies the publication is challenging a widely accepted viewpoint. Okay, so we could say, we could use actually the writer implies the publication. So implies the publication, so we could use that word as well, is written, So the use of third person simple declarative implies the publication is introducing the topic of accents, but from a geographical distance. using the proper noun Brits introduces positions the writer at a distance from Britain. Now, because I'm doing this quickly, like you would in an exam, I'm already thinking, I'm overthinking, I don't like the wording of that sentence, but I'm going to come back. Now, remember, we're just modelling. This doesn't mean it's our final one. Okay, so text B uses an. So we've said the use of the third person simple declarative. Now, the immediate point of contrast is that text B, the way we speak, so we could say text B uses a first person plural title. The way we speak can change our life. So we've got the way we speak. Now we could have actually said a bit more detail, the use of the first person complex declarative. I'm just going to get that, and that makes it better. Ooh. I do love computers for the ability to kind of type and talk at the same time. And then, so we've got text B uses a first person plural complex declarative. The way we speak can change our life. This positions the author as. What kind of voice then does that create? Why the first person? What does it change? So it says here then text B uses an imperative. This positions the author as having a voice of power. So this positions the author of having, why first person? When anything's in the first person, okay, it's that sense of it's a shared experience, that there's that they're invested, that they are personally connected. So this positions the audience as having a personal investment and connection to the topic. Okay, now we then got text A uses, contrastingly text B uses, and then this effectively creates. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just following that process. Okay, I just want you to pause me, and I want you just to copy and complete those last sentence stems using that process of just referring back to the two titles. I don't want you to look beyond the titles. I want you to look at those titles, okay? And that's the model one. There is a second model I want to show you and model with you that we'll do next. Okay, so I don't need to see that at this stage. You're going to give me a final essay in a few lessons' time, but that's option one. So option one is using the example of a real student to model our own. Now, the other option gives us, if you like, greater autonomy. It gives us a bit more freedom. We can work instead of following the student's model really closely. So this is the last bit I'm going to ask you to do today. Okay, I'm going to model option two, and then I would like you to write your paragraph. So I'm just going to say that we're still using the same quotes. I just want to show you, because then you'll be able to compare. That paragraph feels more natural. This way of doing it feels better. So although we're using the same quotes, you wouldn't you wouldn't write both paragraphs up for your final. You would choose the better of the two responses. So we're now going to just use the acronym IDEAL as a kind of checklist as we write our own paragraph. Now, we're not using sentence stems as we did before. We're going to just use the acronym. So we want to identify and interpret a point of view. So accent shy Brits, anxious to talk posh. So my first question is, in this title, what is the writer's perspective, opinion, feeling about British people? Can you get it? What he's saying, or what are they saying about British people? That British people are, okay, good, got all these feelings of anxiety and concern around accents. So we're going to identify and interpret a perspective. Now, we're going to be quite systematic. We're going to use the wording of our acronym, ideal to start our sentences. So we're going to say, the writer of text A establishes, okay, now we're going to use this word perspective, okay, establishes a perspective, that offers the opinion, I'm getting too wordy, sorry. The writer of text A establishes a perspective that British people are, what did we say earlier? This accent shy, anxious, what's another word for anxious? Are concerned. So the writer of text A established the perspective that British people are concerned about their accents. Now, yet we're starting simple. So it seems like a simple, remember those sentences I got you to do at the start? This is where these kind of statements are going to be used, or we can reuse them. The writer of text A establishes a perspective that British people are concerned about their accents. Now, we could just tweak that. So we could say, the writer of text A immediately establishes through the title. So then we are beginning to use some of those from that other model. So the writer of text A immediately establishes through the title a perspective that British people are concerned about their accents. So now we want to do the describe the language, how it's presenting that idea. Okay, so we're going to say the simple declarative accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh. So now I've got my thing, but I want to think, so what are the words or phrases there that are creating this idea of anxiety, this idea of worry? Because I've said that it's a perspective that British people are concerned. Okay, so anxious. So what have we said? What is anxious? That I am anxious, the anxious boy, she was anxious, that's an adjective. So the simple declarative accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh uses the adjective. Now, Brits anxious to talk posh are anxious. Now, actually, anxious is coming after the noun that they're describing. So that puts it in the predicative position. So uses the predicative adjective, anxious. So can you see how for that description, we've gone from simple declarative, we've said predicative adjective. So we're getting levels of labeling in, okay? We've got declaratives, we've got anxious. So now we're thinking about that explanation, representation, and the effect. Now, because of the A grade student we've seen before, you don't always have to do effect and representation together. You can do one or the other. So we could say the simple declarative accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh uses the predicative adjective anxious to present an attitude of concern and worry in the British people. In the British people. Now, we could just pause there. Okay, I've got my I. The writer of text A immediately establishes the title. Through the title, a perspective that British people are concerned about their accents. The simple declarative accent shy Brits anxious to talk posh uses the predicative adjective anxious to present an attitude of concern and worry in the British people. Now, accent shy Brits. Now, accent shy itself is quite a strange little kind of noun phrase that this writer creates. But to shy means if I'm shy, that I'm nervous of something, that I'm holding back. So accent shy. So Brits are shy about their accents, okay? To present an attitude of concern and worry in the British people. With the noun phrase accent shy, suggesting that this worry stems from concern around linked to their accents. Now, there's so much we could go even further. We could look at the posh, the talk, okay? But we've done lots of so far explanation. Now, if we wanted to do the effects, we could say the impact of this on the reader, okay? Our candidate the A grade student love to use the word this positions. Okay, so this positions the reader. So we've talked about representation. So we could say this simple yet effective headline positions the reader to understand the topic and tension of the article. I go too quick for you guys, of the article. So you could see how potentially once you've started your I and your D, the E can be quite organic. You can end up writing a lot. Our student text A really wrote a kind of like a nice healthy paragraph. We've probably written too much on text A. We haven't done anything about text B. Okay, now appreciating context, link and compare. Okay, this simple yet effective headline positions the reader to understand the topic and tension of the article. Interestingly, because that's just like a nice fake word when you want to say like an extra point. Interestingly, the article is from a Canadian publication and explains the use of a third person voice and the reference to Brits. Oh. Now, the reason I wanted to do that, I wanted to mention the third person there. I've shown context. I know it's a Canadian publication. There's the third person point of view. So it's writing about what's happening in Britain rather than from within. So it explains the use of the third person voice and the reference to bits to write about the issue from a global position rather than within the British experience. Now I'm being a bit Spinal Tap here. My paragraph's too much really. If I was in a real exam condition, this amount of detail would be unrealistic. But this is always the joy / curse when you're doing things online. You can go too big. I could have kept it simpler. But it just means I can nicely segue into my link and compare. Okay. So contrastingly, so a nice obvious comparing word. Now, why is it contrast? Because my last point is third person, and we know that the way we speak is first. Okay. Contrastingly, text B uses a first person. Uses a first person voice within the title. The use of the complex declarative, I'm fixing my mistake, remember, the way we speak can change our life. Okay, the use of the complex declarative, the way we speak can change our life. Now, what you'll also see is I'm no longer going in the IDEAL order, but what I'm making sure is that in my link, I'm beginning to hit those criteria. I've got another describe in there, complex declarative. Okay, now I could link that to a perspective, and then that would be my segue into my next paragraph. So the use of the complex declarative, the way we speak can change our life, creates a positive. Now, a positive perspective in which the writer champions the benefits of changing, I've said adapting, haven't I, in my table, of adapting the way you speak. Now, that is like a paragraph turned all the way up to 11. I'm still dealing with exactly the same information as here, but rather than using the wording and phrasing of this student, I'm now going on to my own. Now, what I would love you to do, guys, okay, is just to make sure, we're not going to write the whole essay today. I'm going to set you off with that with the next lesson. Just practice the two methods and decide to yourself, do you actually prefer something that this is this heavily structured, where you've got all the sentence stems, but you're just changing them? Or actually, do you prefer the freedom of this model? I would say this creates greater autonomy for your own voice to emerge. It enables you to do more integrated ideas. This is much more structured. Yes, it's an A-grade student, but you might feel more restricted. So by the end of today's lesson, I would love you to have that paragraph complete and to do one of your own following this method. Okay, guys, thank you for working so hard today, and I'll speak to you again next week.